Welcome to this episode of Kingology. We're your host Mark. This is number 14 in this series. We're piling through these. And tonight I want to talk about the very first book in the Dark Tower series. The Dark Tower series is a pretty famous series. I think anyone who's read King or knows a bit about King will be aware of it. It was originally 7 books that formed this epic story concerning Roland the Gunslinger. There has been an 8th one added called The Wind Through the Keyhole as well a few years ago, which is like can be shuffled in. Now I think it falls between 3 and 4 or 4 and 5. I can't remember for now, but overall it's 8 books. Now The Gunslinger is the first volume in this series, as I said, and King is King views the Dark Tower as his magnum opus, really. It was originally written, I think, as 5 separate short stories and then fused them together at a slightly later date to make this novel. His first publication was in 1982. Now, it's odd. I didn't realise this book had been rewritten a little by King, I think in the early 2000s, to make it a bit more coherent and coordinate with the rest of the series. He felt there was some continuity errors or missteps. And I didn't realise this, and I thought I'm not quite sure if I've read both versions and got them confused, or if I've only ever read the late one. But the thing is, when I reread this recently, and this has been the 3rd time I've read this, possibly the 4th. I do remember the first time I read it, I felt it was quite a disjointed work. It definitely had the feel of something being a fusion of short stories into a longer narrative. Whereas I didn't feel that in this most recent reading. I don't think I felt it in every reading after the first one either. I wasn't sure if I just got used to the form or whether it had changed. So it's possible I read both versions and not realised it, but I don't know. I think the revision was kind of controversial. We get controversial things when artists update their work, don't we? You know, we all know it from Star Wars and Steven Spielberg updating E.T. and so on and so forth. But then some people view such updates as improvements, and the case in point probably is Blade Runner. Of course, that's a movie. I'm not quite sure of anything similar in books. I'm sure there are, but I can't think of anything. It was originally inspired by a poem by Robert Browning, which begins, "Chol Roland to the Dark Tower came," which actually is a quote from King Lear. William Shakespeare's King Lear. And this book has a great opening line, which I think is used in a few places throughout the series, as far as I remember. That opening line being, "The man in black fled across the desert and the gunslinger followed." The main story of this particular novel, which is clearly a set-up prequel to a longer narrative. It just feels like that because the novel, though it does result in quite a good way, it could surely be something that's just set up for a larger narrative. It really is obviously like that. But it involves a gunslinger named Roland of Gilead, who's chasing this dark man across a wasteland of some odd future, alternate world, whatever it is. It's often said that in this one the world has moved on. It's kind of like the world's gone to entropy, is how it kind of feels. But if it is an alternative world, it does share points of commonality with our own world. Jesus is mentioned a fair bit. The song Hey Jude is mentioned, and during his encounters, he encounters a boy called Jake, who is clearly from our version of Earth. He talks about things that the gunslinger has no knowledge, but they're clearly references to things in our timeline or our Earth. As well as this being a chase story, we do get some backstory and flashbacks about the young Roland training to become a gunslinger, and we get this lore about these gunslingers. They're like the last of the righteous law in the world. They're kind of like the Jedis, I suppose. It's that kind of feel. There's a lot about his training by a big man called Court. There's stuff about his father and mother, and a dark man stroke advisor to his father, who seems to be a fomenter of trouble. And we get a very odd thing where he's chasing this dark man who in this is called Martin. Sometimes the name changes on this narrative, but I still get it confused even when I read it a few times. At one point, the gunslinger comes to a town where a female preacher, a large woman, a female preacher, is got a lot of power in his town, and it's clear that Martin's impregnated this female preacher with some sort of demon or something, and she manages to turn the whole town against Roland. And Roland slaughters all of them. I think over 100 people. But he is taken in a bad way, and he himself gets saved by this boy Jake, who looks after him when he's in a bad way. And there's another section of this kind of level of slaughter where he encounters something called slow mutants while they're travelling down this tunnel. This is like I say, this is a chase novel. In between all the action that's going on, we learn about, as I say, the past of Roland, the initiation tests, and we learn something about the character, the gunslinger, who's willing to sacrifice something that's important to him just to get through this test. He gives us an insight into this man who's got an ability to sacrifice things he loves to get what he wants. He will not be turned or deterred for this quest. And at one point later in the journey, I'm not sure if to go to spoilers. I mean, this is over 30 years old now. He has quite a drastic choice involving sacrifice that if he can choose to keep his pursuit or to stop this sacrifice happening. He does choose to keep the pursuit, which is a pretty dark thing in this book. There's some fine words in this book too. It's quite a bit different from some of his other stuff. It's quite an appealing set. I can see why people like The Dark Tower, and I have read all of the books of The Dark Tower at least once through, some of them more than once, such as this one. And it's a kind of interesting lore and world building that King's doing here, which is I can't see in any of his earlier work. I mean, he builds scenes really well, but he just doesn't build an alternative universe to this point, you know. It's kind of a cool confrontation and finish, I think, that involves... It's a little cryptic, and it becomes clearer if you read more books involving tarot reading. Now, I do remember I didn't really like this bit of the book the first time I read it, because it kind of said... I had the feeling it was like, this is just trying to get me to read the second book. This doesn't explain itself very well at all. But it involves a tarot reading involving characters called the Sailor, the Prisoner, Death... the Lady of Shadows, things like that, the tower itself. And here, the man that Roland is pursuing claims to not be the man he really wants. He's just a pawn of the man he really wants. Again, setting up a longer, more richer narrative. It's quite a downbeat book. It's quite ambitious too. Roland's a hard character to fathom, and deliberately so, and he remains a hard character to fathom throughout the whole series. In fact, I think it's only book 4 or 5. I get him confused. No, 4. I think it is, where we get a massive backstory involving Roland and his first love. That we really find some stuff out about Roland, and in fact, that's my favourite book in this series as well. It's so rich and dense, but we do in this book and in most of the rest of the series, we get this feeling that Roland only really wants to exist to follow the quest. He doesn't consider anything beyond it. Nothing else matters beyond it. It's rather cool. I do believe that King had Clint Eastwood from the Dollars Westerns in mind when he started writing Roland, and you can kind of see that. And I've listened to audiobooks of this series, and again, those audiobooks tend to the readers of them tend to voice Roland in a Clint Eastwood-esque kind of way. So it reinforces that whole feeling. It's an interesting mix of this Strange Otherworld is an interesting mix of fantasy, futurology, future dystopias, or more still even post-apocalypse kind of stuff, Western as well, and it's kind of interesting. We've got this one-dimensional character, Roland, who's not, it's not through poor writing, he's one-dimensional because he's so obsessed and driven about one particular thing. He makes himself one-dimensional by the nature of his quest. It kind of works. It's a really solid read. I think it's a great start to the series, and frankly, as long as the start of a series just sets up things well, it doesn't have to be a great book. But this is a pretty solid read too. I wouldn't say it's his best. It's not his best in the series even, but it's a pretty solid start, and I enjoy it more. I enjoyed it more the second and third time than the first time. So if you've read it once and didn't really feel it, I suggest give it another try. Just give it another try and see what you think. It's not a lengthy book. It's worth a look. Overall, I think I'd give it 7 out of 10. It's not a great work, but I found it quite interesting and absorbing. So I think it's worth a look. And like I said, there were bits on it I didn't like in the first reading, but it was very memorable. It's very hard to forget what goes on in this book. It just sort of lodges in your brain, not in a overwhelming, wow, that was fantastic way, but in a slightly more insidious way. It just lodges and stays there, and you forget. You might not remember the details, but you remember the thrust of what's going on in here. I'd recommend it. Okay, I think that's enough for that one. So next time, the little podcast will be covering different seasons, the set of books, 4 books, and probably one at a time as well. So it'll be one podcast per book in that. So we'll stretch it over a bit more than just a month for those 4 as well. Okay, so bye from me.